Cześć.
Dzień dobry. Now, as some of you may know, as it is the focus of this channel, I do have somewhat of a collection of swords. Now, someone recently asked me at work, what is the largest sword you own? Now, as you can see, I have it here with me in this beautiful silk bag, and for those of you who would have guessed, it is actually a Chinese sword. It is not a medieval great sword or some kind of fantasy sword. It is actually a two-handed Jian or Jian, depending on which language you're speaking, and it is quite the beast. Anyway, today I thought, since some people on my channel I know love looking at high quality Chinese stuff, we're going to take a look at this one because it is absolutely very good. Anyway, I hope you enjoy. Now, how I come across ownership of this lovely sword is a very simple story. I had another sword and it come with a catalogue from China. You may have seen it. It is the single-handed straight sword I featured in another video, which is also folded steel and combat ready. And they advertise this in just immaculate two-handed sword as a Monkey King sword. Now, as you may know, I do enjoy the Monkey King. I like the story and the character, and I even have a tattoo on my back featuring that particular, Chinese mythological character. So of course I jumped at the chance to get a Monkey King sword, not only because for namesake, but also because it just looks absolutely beautiful, and it's very rare to find just a high quality combat ready double-handed sword.
I think I might leave this one to the adults. It's way too heavy for me just yet.
Ooh. There's just so much power and authority in this sword. You can really feel just the sheer force that it swings when you use both hands to propel it forward like that. Now, this isn't a surprise, as it is overall 130 centimeters long, and the blade itself is 95 centimeters. The weight comes up to 1.9 kilograms. Now, these specifications clearly put it in the range of a European longsword. The handle, I feel, it's a bit more than a hand and a half. It's clearly a two-handed handle, and it just gives you such great leverage. And check the point of balance here. Ooh, where are we? Where are we? Oh, quite there. It is one fist from the hilt, which is spot on perfect for a lot of blades. Now, as you can see, it is quite nimble in the two-handed cut, but also for thrusting, which is the main point of this sword, it is very good. There's a bit of spring to the blade, but it is very stiff, and it's nimble enough that you can use it single-handedly. So now we're going to have a quick look at the features of this sword, and then we're going to talk about some of the more unique two-handed Chinese techniques, which I don't think get as much love as the single-handed Jian, or Gim as you call it, does. Okay, let's begin by looking at the exterior of the sword. Now, as you can see, the sheath is very well ornate. You have here this little carry strap, which is a braided cord, nice little jade beads, a nice little clasp here. It's fairly sturdy and definitely very decorative. The sheath itself, as you can see, has multiple decorative areas and a capped end, which is very nice. And it is a very good quality timber that is very heavy. You could indeed unsheath the sword and club someone with the sheath in your offhand if you chose to do so. Now, as we examine the guard, we can see that it is, well, characteristically Chinese, as in it's nearly almost non existent. Now, many of this style of guard is hollow. This one here is actually solid steel. And like I said, it is very minimalist, which is a commonality amongst Asian swords, whether they're Japanese or Chinese. They tend to have either a small guard like this, or a disc, or virtually nothing at all. I mean, we see European swords with a knuckle bow or a big crucible guard. This one here, it's just very tiny. It's not all there, but it is solidly built and it's definitely the Asian style. As we go down the handle, we can see some nicely engraved fittings, and the handle itself is the same timber as the scabbard, although most likely from a different piece, as in the grain is a lot tighter. Tighter grain, of course, means more dense and solid timber, which is definitely is. That is solid wood. Now, the blade itself is attached not by one, but by two pegs here, which are definitely very nicely ornate. Now, many Chinese swords have the blade gone through and a screwed up section here at the end, often a very ugly nut just sitting on the back of it, or pinned over it for more traditional. This one here, as I said, the blade is attached by two pegs, and the end here is solid and capped and very round, which we'll get to later. There's a reason for this, and it's almost reminiscent of a metal sleeved staff, which again goes with the Monkey King theme. Now, the thickness of the handle is something I'd like to touch on, as even for my relatively large hands, it definitely fits very well. Many Asian swords have a very narrow handle. This one here, see, I can just get the loop attached with my thumb and forefinger, and it's a very good attention to detail here is it's actually thinner here and thicker here. So as you go down the handle towards the butt, it gets thicker. Now obviously this will have the quality of making it less likely to slide out of your hand, but that's just a very nice little touch. Time to move on to the all-important blade. Now, as you can see, this one here is folded metal, and that is a relatively cheap thing to get from China because the labor is so inexpensive that you can get very, very nicely folded metal like this at a very, competitive price. Now, one thing to note, we're especially considering the weight of this thing, most of it is in this first third of the blade right here. That is just an enormous fort. You can see it cancels dramatically here. But I just want to take a look at this side profile. That is enormous. That is up this end, it's close to 12 to 13 millimeters. And down this end, it's closer to 8 or 9 millimeters. Now, that is an incredibly solid piece of metal, and we'll get to the reason for that later on. And it's got a fuller actually in this metal fort section here. As you can see, this side here has a very nice little dragon design. And this side here has some characters, which I believe will be the manufacturer, and it's very well presented in this little border with some fancy engraving. And as you can see, that is just a very beautiful piece of metal. It is just so solid, completely unsharpened, that will just shatter anything which hits into it. Once we get past that first third of the blade, which is clearly for defense, we get into the more offensive end, which is a single spine going down to a rather nice little tip. Now, I've not sharpened this. It's moderately sharp, but not scarily sharp. It's exactly how it arrived from the manufacturer. And that's because this is a very expensive sword, and I just want to preserve it. I'm not exactly too keen to go out there and do a lot of cutting practice with it, as I have more inexpensive double-handed swords, which I can use for that. Now, one thing you'll note about this single spine design, now it is a diamond-shaped profile. It might be a little hard to see on the camera here, But rather than the edges of the diamond going up to the spine being straight, they are curved inwards. So it sort of scoops inward like that in a concave method rather than just being flat like that. So if you looked at side on here, you can see there is a slight curvature from the edge up to the spine, curving inward. So it sort of does save a little bit of weight in this end, and I would imagine that profile would probably lead to better penetration. Now the tip is not scarily pointed. It's exactly how I got it. When we go right in there, you can see that beautiful wavy grain on the metal. Let's just get a bit of that on camera. That is just absolutely stunning, which is why I don't want to risk scratching it with my rather not the best sharpening skills. It's an absolute mirror finish, and here is where it comes to the fort. You can see it cancels out in these sort of little curves here. Very well done, not just brutally beaten into shape. It's very smooth. Everything about this sword is just very smooth and flowing. Now, as you can see here where the defensive fork cancels out to the blade, for about a fist it is relatively unsharp. Then we get to a sharp edge which continues all the way up to the tip, giving us a very nice little, very sharp for cutting as well as pointy for penetrating, especially with that very shallow profile. Now, in my opinion, it is rather unfortunate that these two-handed Chinese swords are not as popular as a single-handed counterpart. Now, you see the single-handed straight sword almost anywhere. It is very popular, whether it is a wushu demonstration or Tai Chi in the park. A lot of people are very familiar with the single-handed straight sword. Now, the majority of these on the market are very flimsy, very lightweight. They are for show. They are not made practical. You cannot cut with them. So it's very refreshing to get a combat-ready one such as this one here. However, the techniques for two-handed Chinese straight sword are equally unloved. You do not see them very often. Now, there is a reason for this. That is because, while this is a battlefield weapon, it sort of fell out of favour. Then later on, when northern China was under attack by Japanese pirates, people started to pick this up a bit more as a way to counter the katana. Thus, two-handed straight sword really only appears in the northern Chinese martial arts. Fortunately for me, I do know the movements from a routine, kata if you will, called Mantis Penetrates the Forest. It is from the praying mantis style, and it uses this sword, and it not only uses it well, it contains almost every technique you could think of for a double-handed Chinese straight sword. With regard to these techniques, many of them are very similar, if not identical, to the thrusting techniques from a single-handed straight sword. For example, a classic defensive maneuver is you'll get thrust at either over this side or over this side of your sword. Now, rather than swatting thrusts away foolishly like this, foolishly as the timing could be off and you could completely miss and their blade will get you, and it leaves you very little riposte abilities. Usually when a thrust comes at you, this is very universal in both Asian swords as well as European swords, you deflect it with this end here as it comes over here while pointing the blade at your opponent the entire time. So if they come over your blade to this side here, you'll deflect this way. If they come over your blade this side here, you deflect this way. And that always leaves you in a position where you can counter with a stab back. This is a very universal technique. However, this also has very universal techniques for two-handed swords. One which is you do with the Chinese war sword, which is much shorter and much more, cut orientated with zero thrusting, is identical to a move in this. In fact, it's a bit more articulated here. One technique from the sequence is to step back and to the side while lifting to parry a thrust, usually from another sword or a spear, and then following up by a double-handed cut straight to the head. So as you do it, step to the side, chop, step to the other side, chop. These are very universal techniques which you could do with almost any sword, and they're probably repeated in European styles as well. However, there's a couple of unique techniques for this particular Chinese sword which take full advantage of its features. Now, one feature of this particular sword which I absolutely love is this enormous slab of metal here, which is obviously 100% defensive in nature. Now, as I said, the northern Chinese were under attack from Japanese pirates who would no doubt wield katanas. The katana, as you know, is famous for a very powerful, straight, vertical cut. Now, how would you cancel this? If you had a single-handed Jian, the guard would be broken. It'd be a very tough one. And even if you stab as they come at you, you're committing suicide. You're both going to die in that exchange. So one technique here, taking full advantage of this heavy-duty slab, it sort of looks like this when you perform it. And people say, what's up with that footwork? You're stepping in this cross step sort of stance. It's very simple. If I'm facing you here and you cut directly at me, if I step to the side this way and you miss and I allow your sword to slide off, you could still take out my leg, and if you cut my leg, I'm not going to be able to move and might as well be game over. However, you do not have two steps. You cannot go 1, 2. It must be one motion. So to get to off the center line this way, my entire body, I step behind like that. As you step behind, you raise this slab to guard you. Hopefully their sword connects and slides off, and then you return to them from this angle here. So they are cutting at you this way here, straight down this central line. You are basically stepping off it, as well as pulling up a defense, allowing their sword to contact, hopefully damage really badly on this section here, slide away, and then you finish up like that, coming at them from an angle. Now, especially if they charge in very forcefully on you, then you can actually step back completely and cut through. But the point is, bring your body to the side as they come at you and just throw in this absolute slab of metal straight up and catch in a very powerful blow with both hands. That is a very useful technique. Now you can do it the other side as well. It is a technique which can be used on both sides. Whether you do it this way or this way, always stepping away, never to where you're blocking. And that is one way to deal with the fearsome katana straight chop. So as I mentioned earlier, the handle to this sword, the blade is fixed in place with 2 pins. It is not ran the full way through and fixed at the end, either pinned or with a screw. It's held in here, and the end is more reminiscent of like a metal sleeved staff, as in a wooden staff, where you have each end has a metal sleeve to increase damage. This sort of goes along with the Monkey King theme of the sword. Now, you might ask, well, what's the point of that besides aesthetics? Well, there's a very clear point to having the end like this rather than a more fanciful decorative cap at the end. That is, in super close range, sometimes when you have blocked and somebody's pressuring you, you may use the end to pop them one in the face. For example, directly from the sequence of techniques from the routine is you do this block back, so the same block we done before. have you come all the way back, push the end forward, and then follow up with a perfectly horizontal cut. So the way it would look is we're fighting forward, hit, and cut. Now, what's the point of this? Obviously, if they're pressuring you and they come at you and your guard is collapsing a bit, it's a bit harder to deploy the point if they're super close into you. So you can rush forward, butt them in the face with this beautiful capped end, and if that works well, you hit them or force their head to come back, exposing their neck. So you pop them one in the face, their head goes back, and then you go straight for the kill shot with a perfectly horizontal cut. This can be done both sides, so you can pop them this way and here, or you can here pop them this way and here. Either way, the point is to come with a flat cut right on top of pop, flat cut, right on one on top of the other. Well, there you have it. That is my Chinese two-handed straight sword. It is one of my most favourite swords. It is just so unique as Chinese swords built to this size, double-handed with such a generously big handle, as well as such sturdy, heavy construction, are a bit rare in a marketplace flooded with very cheap, lightweight imitations. So, anyway, would you like a sword like this, or maybe even this one yourself?
Maybe when I'm able to swing it by myself and I'm strong enough.
Well, she's gonna have to hit the weights a bit harder then. Go and say yeah.
Papa.